I gave the Sony Xperia XA last year actually quite a bad rating, mostly due to its weak battery life. But fortunately enough, I can already tell you right now that this is not the case at all on this year's XA1 Ultra. And over the smaller sibling, this one has actually one important advantage: lack of competition. But if it's just a good purchase because of that, or just because it's good in general, that's something we're going to find out. So let's jump into the first thing: design and build. Of course, from the back and from the front, it looks a lot like any other Sony phone. If that's something good or not is something you have to decide, but it definitely comes along with quite huge top and bottom bezels. But that's actually the only thing that I could really complain about, because as you can see here, it's a very narrow device with pretty much no side bezels. The only thing that slightly freaks me out that on my unit, the bezel on the right side is actually a little bit bigger than on the left. But due to being so narrow and with a quite grippy side and actually quite grippy back, this phone is way easier to hold on to and actually use than I would have ever expected. In terms of build quality, it's at least good, even though it does creak just a little bit. But by just using it normally, absolutely no problems, nothing that I was concerned about. Otherwise, we have here the LED along with the camera. That is flush, by the way, quite nice to see. Of course, we also have the microphone and the headphone jack on the top, SD card and SIM card tray on the left, but unfortunately it still reboots once you take that out. Otherwise, we have here USB Type-C, the speaker on the right bottom side, even though I expected it to be actually front-facing stereo, which it looks like, but it isn't. On the front also you can see the flash along with the camera and the notification LED, but no capacitive buttons because Sony uses on-screen button for ages. But you've maybe already noticed one thing missing. Yes, there is no fingerprint reader at all, which is a little bit unfortunate, something I don't really get, especially for this price range. Something in the US wasn't a thing anyways, but still. We have the power button actually quite nicely placed along with the volume rocker, and both of those feel absolutely fine. And we still have the dedicated camera shutter button. So overall, even though it's maybe not the most compact phone, especially since being quite tall, I actually have to say it was quite easy to use, which was actually surprisingly nice. In terms of the display though, 1080p, which is absolutely nice, absolutely no problems at all. The only thing where I have a little bit of a complaint about is if we want to change something about the overall display, we only have settings for the white balance. And I actually had to change this time because out of the box it was way too cold. And my only complaint in this case otherwise would have been that the colors are a little bit washed out. Compared to all the other phones that I have here right now, it is noticeable. If you just use this phone though alone on its own for a few days, you will get used to it and it's fine. But if you switch to other devices that are just a little bit more saturated, actually more naturally, you will notice this. Otherwise, with 600 lux, it's very bright. The viewing angles are absolutely stable as well. And otherwise, the calibration just being a little bit undersaturated would have been absolutely fine with good blacks and overall absolutely nice qualities. But I just can't give it more than a good, mostly because to being too cold out of the box and just washed out after all. In terms of the speaker, okay, it may not be front-facing stereo, which was what I expected, but I have to actually say it is a quite loud one, and it sounds decent. The only thing that I've noticed on maximum volume, it slightly tends to distort, but overall the balance was absolutely fine. I can't really complain, it was actually better than I expected from a down-firing speaker, so still at least a quite good here. In terms of the headphone jack, I give that one a good because it is better than general, but one thing that I was a little bit disappointed by is that we have an equalizer and a few more settings, but those only work with Sony's own music app, so that's something you have to keep in mind. But if we go along and continue to the performance, let me end all the apps and check the launch times. Here we'll see that it's definitely quite a snappy device, because I have to give it to that. If Sony knows to do one thing is make snappy phones, but I will get to why that actually seems to be the case. Because here is the most important part. If you switch to another app, like for example now, you will see that this is a quite abrupt, fast transition. And this is actually one thing that makes the device feel snappier than it maybe is, but it therefore just feels great. I have no complaints here about that. That is actually something that I want to praise it for, because I really like that snappy transition. Otherwise, you can see browsing in the scroller is maybe not perfect, because you will, after all, see quite some lag. And this is pretty much the one thing that I have to point out about this device, because usually it's mostly quite smooth and it is very fast, but there is quite some noticeable lag visible throughout all the time. So that is just something you have to get a little bit used to. There is a little bit more lag. It's not a hard lag and it's not a really disturbing one. And especially using this phone in daily use, just normally, you won't really notice it that much after a little bit of time with that phone, but it is definitely something that has to be pointed out, because if they would have kind of been able to get rid of that, it would have been even nicer. I think that's due to the Helio, because usually Sony knows to optimize their phones absolutely great, and I don't really know what to blame here. It's still a quite good performance. Overall, it was quite fine, but it's not quite maybe on a level of a Snapdragon 625, which is maybe not quite as fast sometimes, but just generally more consistent and smooth. Gaming performance here as well was also a little bit below, I would say, the Snapdragon 625, because we got, I would say, moderate frame rates, maybe a little bit below that, not really any frame drops or skips. Otherwise though, absolutely okay, playable, even more demanding games, but just don't expect the best experience here. It got a little bit warm, but due to just the weather being a little bit warm in general anyways, I wouldn't really see that as a problem at all. So what it is in terms of games is still okay, at least decent, if not maybe a little bit better. Now, in terms of the battery, a full charge, 2.5 hours. For the 2700 mAh battery, that's maybe not that great, but it's also not a real huge issue. 12% for an hour of YouTube is actually quite okay. But what impressed me, and I actually don't understand how they managed to squeeze out that battery life out of this phone. Because in normal use, I got values from about 5 to maybe even 6 hours on mobile data. I have no idea how that's even possible with such a small battery and such a big display. And on Wi-Fi, actually even 8 to 9 and sometimes even possibly 10 hours is something that I don't get at all. So I would say maybe expect 5.5 to maybe 8.5 respectively on mobile data and Wi-Fi only. And I have to say, especially with the really good standby drain that Sony knows to optimize their phones with, I have to say I'm impressed with this Great Plus battery life. And sorry for still calling this Great Plus, but since I started this way, never expected there to be so many phones with that rating. I just don't want to change it now, not to confuse people. But otherwise, I would say, let's get to the software. And of course, you can already see this is the standard launcher. Nothing really special, it's an absolutely standard thing. We have a very stock Android-like appearance. We have the theming engine. You can't really change all that much to it. It's mostly the basic colors, but it is at least there. And you don't really get too many options on Sony phones because it's mostly very something stock bare minimum. But what we have, of course, here is clear audio plus sound effects. Like I said, the equalizer only works in Sony's app. Accessory settings, of course, as well. And in terms of the display, we have some features like, for example, image enhancement, which I actually wouldn't maybe use because it tended to noticeably oversaturate. But otherwise, there is not too much to point out. It is a very bare minimum, no frill software, but a very solid one, a very nicely optimized one. And updates actually are something that Sony's very known for, delivering very fast and for an actually long time. So this is definitely really good. Now, let's get into the camera here and you can see the selfies first. And I have to say this is a potentially great selfie cam because maybe not always, because this is the thing, it has autofocus, but the autofocus is a little bit unreliable. But otherwise, as you can see here, so many details, so nice and sharp, so accurate colors, and even indoors this still manages to deliver absolutely. So if it wouldn't be for the sometimes a little bit flaky, unreliable autofocus, this would be actually a great cam. You can see also the video here, absolutely great quality, but it just didn't get me in focus for like a minute. But once it actually achieved that, as you can see here, you get an absolutely fantastic front-facing camera, way better than many others. So kudos to that. In terms of low-light pictures, here with the flash and here without, you can see that it is at least a decent camera because you have to have a steady hand and you should still get a little bit less grain than, but it is not the very best low-light cam, just as you can see, especially shutter times and so on. Now about the pictures outside or in good light conditions, I have to say one thing. The camera almost has the potential to be great, but I would say at least very good if it wouldn't be for two things, as you can already see here. On macros, it was quite flaky in terms of autofocus. It just so many times didn't quite get it right, as you can see here once again, and also a few times here more. If that wouldn't be the case, and for the extremely slow image processing, I would have at least given this camera a very good, because the results that you can see here are very detailed, especially landscape is very detailed, very sharp, colors, everything looks right. So if you have the patience, if you especially maybe get it manually and with the autofocus, you can get absolutely very good, if not great pictures. but it's just generally a little bit harder to achieve. But the video is something that I definitely have to say is disappointing, because this is 1080p and it almost doesn't even look as good as 720p, because otherwise it's very smooth. The autofocus works very subtle, actually very nice, and it's quite a nice footage, but it's just not sharp at all. It looks quite washed out, blurry at all times, which is just very disappointing, because if that would have been the case to be better, the overall camera experience would have been even better. But it's still the slow auto focus and image processing that isn't just the best. And that's why I would already say, let's just jump into the pros and cons. Here I want to start off with the quite good build quality. As I said, it does crack just a little bit, but nothing you will really notice normally. It is very narrow for a 6-incher and actually way easier to hold than I would have expected. The display is at least good, the speaker is loud and good, and we have also a good headphone jack. The performance is quite good, but what we have here is absolutely great plus battery life, a really good software. When it comes to the cameras, a potentially great front-facing camera, a decent low light cam, and a potentially very good main cam. Now in terms of the not so great things, we have still, after all, the big bottom and top bezels. Unfortunately, no fingerprint reader at all. The display seems to be a little bit more on the washed out side. The speaker tends to distort maximum volume, but it's not a huge issue at all. The equalizer unfortunately only works with Sony's own music app. It's relatively small in terms of battery size compared to its general size. We have extremely slow and also a little bit annoying image processing. The autofocus for macros and selfies is generally a little bit unreliable. Video quality quite disappointing, and it has kind of weak specs for the price, which already leads me to the conclusion, because at least now in Germany this phone costs around 380 euros, but therefore you only get the Helio P20 and so on, where you for example get on the Nubia Z11 Max already a Snapdragon 652. And if we quickly compare these two phones, what you get on the Z11 Max over this one here is just the better performance in general. Battery life is actually quite similar. The speaker is also quite similar, but you get a fingerprint reader, you get the way nicer display, and you get a little bit more of a rugged device in terms of in-hand feel, but therefore it also felt a little bit more actually clunky. Maybe not quite as tall as this one, but this one has the advantage of just being a little bit more narrow. But the advantages here is that the camera has the potential to be even better. We have both camera battery life on both. We have though here way more of a clean stock software, and you will get updates way quicker because this one is already running 7.0, where the Z Max is still, or the Z11 Max is still on 6. So you have to decide for your own. I would say this is pretty much the only competition in that price range that I know of, because the Z11 Max costs pretty much the same. So you know what, you have to decide what you want. You can maybe sacrifice a little bit performance, but therefore get the more narrow device with overall quite good experience and with good, potentially even very good, if not great camera results, but it is definitely not perfect. And especially for this price range, I would have expected a little bit or a little bit of a better performance. But for what it is, especially coming from last year's XA, I didn't really try the XA Ultra. This is a nice step forward. It's definitely not perfect, especially with things missing like a fingerprint reader. It will have a harder time, but there is just not much competition. If you want a solid big phone for not too much money, this is a solid solution. I'm not quite sure if it's the best one, because it's, yeah, it's not perfect, but which phone is in the end anyways. But you know the pros, you know the cons, you have to decide which is important for you and if this phone could be right. If you want to know a little bit more, you can just ask me down in the description, and otherwise leave me maybe a like and yeah, subscription. Otherwise, a nice day. Bye.